Hello, everyone. My name is Garvin, and while I usually prattle about Greek mythology on the internet, today we'll continue our look at Greek colonization. Last video, we focused on the colonization waves of the Bronze Age Minoans and Mycenaeans. Today, we're going to talk about what drove the colonization wave of the pre Alexander Iron Age Greeks, which for the most part spans from the 8th to 6th century BC. Now, today I'm focusing mostly on the procedure for founding a colony and the types of colonies. This is not going to be an in depth look as I'm not near enough an educated expert for that. I'm what you call an enthusiastic amateur at best, so please keep that in mind while you're listening. Okay, let's assume you're the leader of an expanding Greek city state, and for at least one of the reasons I've talked about in the last video, you've decided to found a colony. Now, broadly speaking, there are two types of colonies you could set up. The first is an emporion, which is basically a large trading post or port. It's not really a full blown city, and most of the people who head there are only going to be there on a temporary basis to make money and come back. The main purpose of this colony is to ensure your access to far off trade routes, bring back strange foreign goods and luxuries, and above everything else, make money. Almenia in northern Syria is considered a really good historical example of this, having been settled by the Greeks there to get access to that area. The second type of colony, and the focus of this video, is called an apokia, which is a settlement that's meant to grow into a full blown city. These are almost always fully politically independent of their mother city, often called a metropolis, but is culturally, religiously, and economically linked with the mother city. A good modern example might be the current day Anglosphere and the current relationship between nations like Australia, Canada, and Great Britain. A Greek example of this would be the city of Syracuse in Sicily. Now, this endeavor requires way more people and resources, but the Greeks would establish over 500 of these colonies from the Black Sea to Spain. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this requires. So, the first thing you have to do is select a leader for your colony, and this is called an Okiskis. He's the leader of the colony and the expedition. He's also the legal founder of the city that will grow from this colony. Once he's selected, and it's always a guy in ancient Greece, so I apologize, ladies, it's his job to go get the approval and get advice from the gods. He does that by heading to Delphi and speaking to the oracle there. Now, there are other oracles, but Delphi is the one that's predominant because everyone across the Mediterranean comes to this oracle, which means there's a lot of information being gathered in this spot. From the written works of the time, we know the oracle would not just convey the blessings of the gods, but give you advice on what spot to put your colony on. This also gives you a moral cover, as you can now claim the land of your colony was granted you by the gods, and isn't just you grabbing some lands just because you can get your dirty mitts on it. There's also a lot of rituals around omens, and those are done in so many different ways that I am not getting lost into those weeds. Once you've secured the blessing and consent of the gods, and you've been told where the best spots to put your colony are, it's time to get your colonists. Now, by modern standards, these would be tiny expeditions, only a couple hundred dudes. Most of the time, that first wave of colonists were only men, and unmarried young men were preferred. Sometimes there would be follow up waves of colonists that would involve entire families, as well as unmarried women. And sometimes, from what we can find, these men would just intermarry with whatever natives peoples they found there. This recruitment can be done in a number of ways. Sometimes it would just be simply calling for volunteers. Other times there'd be a conscription by choosing people through lots. And sometimes it would just be rounding up a good number of military age men who were politically opposed to you for some reason, throwing them on ships and saying, "Don't come back." Now that you've recruited your colonists, gotten your boats, and hopefully gotten supplies for that sailing trip, it's time to get ready to go. Before you leave, the founder heads to the city's sacred hearth. Every Greek city has a common hearth with a fire that's always kept burning, and that fire is sacred to the goddess Hestia. The founder would then light a torch from that hearth, and it'd be among his duties, and this is a big one, to keep that fire burning until a new hearth could be built on the colony and lit from that torch. This is a symbolic and religious symbol of the connection between the mother and daughter city. The Greeks often used mother daughter relationships language and symbols for the relationship between the colonies and their founding city. This isn't too different from what we do with the Olympic flame today, which is also an ancient Greek tradition from their Olympic Games. So at this point, you got your men, you got your boats, you got your supplies, and you have your sacred flame, so it's time to leave. When you arrive to the region that the oracle at Delphi told you to head to, you start looking for the exact spot you're going to build your city. The Greeks would prefer places that gave good trade access while being easily defensible. This meant access to the sea and to fresh water with limited land approaches. Islands with their own water sources, peninsulas, or places bordered on at least two sides by a large river, that kind of thing. They would build the walls of their new city, divide out the land among them, and get to building houses, temples, farms, and all the things that a city needs. The colony was considered in its first phase of its life and not really a real city until the founder dies. I think that might qualify as a downside to being the founder, but you tell me. Once the founder dies, he's buried in the middle of the city, right in the center, usually not too far from that city hearth he had lit in the first place. Usually, the Greeks bury their dead outside the city proper, so you can see that this is a special position that the man would occupy even in death. The founder would become the spiritual patron of the city, and often there's a heroic cult that's built around him with prayers and sacrifices meant to give the city a single figure that's unique to them that they can rally around and make it a touch pole of a shared citywide identity within the bigger Greek cultural identity. Uh, a good secular example of this would be George Washington in the United States. As last I checked, we didn't, sacrifice things to him. At least not yet. The colonies of the Greeks would spread out far and wide and would meet many different fates. Some would become the center of their own networks of colonies, becoming incredibly wealthy and powerful. In some cases, they would be more wealthy and powerful than their mother cities. Others would be destroyed or conquered by natives or imperial powers, or even their fellow Greeks, as for all their ties, the only thing the Greeks seemed to enjoy more than fighting each other was fighting other people. But we're running a bit long again, so I'm going to wrap up right here. Okay, so next week we'll wrap up by covering the different regions of Greek settlements. And I want to thank everyone for their interest, and I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, please leave a like or comment or subscribe so I can maintain my battle against the Dreadlord algorithm. If you've really enjoyed this, consider joining the Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you get a voice in upcoming videos and book reviews. Last week, I reviewed Greeks Overseas, a non-fiction work about Greek colonization by Professor John Boardman. There's a link to that review in the description. Before I go, I do want to say a special thank you to my biggest supporter, Big Steve. As always, man, I appreciate your support. Until next week, folks, stay safe, and of course, keep reading.